Ready? All right, if you would turn to 1 Samuel chapter 7. And this should be our last study on the life of Samuel. If you remember, several months ago we went through a series entitled Israel Wants a King, and talked about King Saul from his beginnings until his end. And we talked about Samuel through a lot of that. So we're not going to redo all that again. If you are watching and you didn't get to see or didn't get to hear the study on that, then I encourage you to go to our sermonaudio.com page or our YouTube page, and you can find that series and listen to those. In chapter 7, I had thought about going into chapter 8 just because, but I think chapter 8 or chapter 7 is a good place to stop, and you'll see what I mean when we get to the end of the chapter. I think it ends well there. If you remember from last time, the Philistines had captured the ark of the Lord. The Lord had punished them greatly in ways we won't go over again tonight, but it was pretty harsh. And they brought the ark back to Israel and gave it back to them with some odd parting gifts, if you want to call it that. Anyway, so it's back in the land now, and so that's where we pick up in 1 Samuel chapter 7, verse 1. And the men of, and again, I'm not going to pronounce that name. It was the same. Well, let's back up to verse 21 in the last chapter. So that's really where this starts. And they sent messengers to the inhabitants of whatever the name of this city is, saying, the Philistines have brought again the ark of the Lord. Come ye down and fetch it up to you. And the men of that city came and fetched up the ark of the Lord, and brought it into the house of Abinadab in the hill, and sanctified Eleazar his son to keep the ark of the Lord. Now, Abinadab, if you remember from our study on Saul, Abinadab was the priest. He was the high priest. So they brought it to his house. Well, he would have lived close to the tabernacle where the ark would have been kept. And it came to pass while the ark abode in that city, that the time was long, for it was 20 years. And all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. So Israel, remember in the battle where they lost the ark, it was a great loss. It was 30-something thousand men that died in that battle. And it was just no competition at all. The Philistines just came in and overthrew them and killed, what was his name? Drawing a blank. The guy that Eli, they overthrew Eli's two sons. They were in charge of the ark, of the care of the ark during that battle, and they were killed. And then eventually, when news of the battle and the loss of the ark got back to Eli, he fell out of his chair and broke his neck and died. So all that's taking place. Israel, it says, all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. In other words, they wept. If you ever read the book or did a study of the book of Lamentations, it's the weeping of Jeremiah is what that was for the people of Jerusalem. That's what this is. That's what he's talking about here. There was great weeping going on, and it appears as though it went on for 20 years. They knew they had messed up. They knew they should not have sent the ark out. For one, if you remember when they did send it out, they were expecting the ark to save them in the battle and not the Lord. They sent it out as an idol, in other words. And so they see the wrong they've done, the sin that they've committed, and they've begun to weep before the Lord. And Samuel spake unto all the house of Israel, saying, If you do return unto the Lord with all your hearts, then put away the strange gods and Ashtaroth from among you, and prepare your hearts unto the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hands of the Philistines. Now at this point in time, Israel is being ruled by the Philistines. They still have their spiritual leaders. They've got Abinadab and his son Eleazar, and they've got as priest, and they've got the Levite priest there. The tabernacle is fully functional. They've also got their prophet and judge, and if you remember, Samuel is a prophet, priest, and judge, both, all three. And so he actually, at this point in time, he is over the I guess the secular matters of the country. He's the one who they go to if there's matters of that need to go to, like what when we would send somebody to court here to sue somebody, or if there was a dispute between two parties, Samuel would be the one to judge those. And but he's also a prophet of the Lord, and he's very close to the Lord. And we see through this book, we see the Lord dealing with Samuel more than he does even the high priest. It's almost as if Samuel he's not the king, of course. We see that later, but he's the one that he's the most important man in the nation at that time. So Samuel told them, all the house of Israel, it says, not just part of them, but all of them. And I say all of them. What we're going to see here, and I'll bring this back up as a reminder later in this lesson, when he's talking about, we've often wondered, like here with Samuel, we see it with David later when he's king. We see it with Solomon, with others when they're king. In the Word of God, when it talks about the children of Israel or the house of Israel or the nation of Israel coming together all in one place, that kind of boggles our mind to think, well, it could be several million people. But that's not what he's talking about. If you dig into this and study it a little bit more, you see it would have been the leaders of each family that would have been there, not the whole nation not the whole nation as a whole, but it would be the leaders of each the leaders of each family would have been there. And so Samuel, it appears, we don't know. Some say that he would go around, that he was a very active judge, that he would go around and meet with people and get their opinion on things, on these types of matters, what they wanted to do and what they were going to do. And know that way, he would find out get a good feeling of what the nation was thinking about by talking to people as he traveled around. It appears he did do some of that, but he was almost like a circuit rider, if you want to call him that. He would go around to different cities and hold his court, or do his judging, and also it appears he preached some while he was there, and he also would tell whatever the Lord had given him to tell the people as far as prophecy. He was a prophet. So he says if they'll just return unto the Lord with all their hearts, the Lord will deliver them out of the hands of the Philistines. Where do we hear that? Where do we hear that later? Remember, in Jesus' day, that's what they were praying for, wasn't it? That the Lord, the Messiah, would come and relieve them of the Romans That's not why he come, and that's not what happened. But that's what they were expecting, and so there's a little bit of correlation there with those two. In verse 4, then the children of Israel did put away Balaam and Ashtaroth, and served the Lord only. And Samuel said, gather all Israel to Mizpeh, and I will pray for you unto the Lord. Now again, he says all Israel. You can't expect the whole nation, I'm talking about men, women, and children, everybody, to come to this. That's an impossibility. It would have been the leaders of the family. And that's, if you go back to the law, that's seems to be the practice, and if he did this, some say he did this during one of their yearly feasts. There was 3 feasts they did at different times throughout the year. Some say that he did it during one of those feasts, and that's why they would have all been there. They would have just been the men of the family that would have been there. And they gathered together in Mizpeh and drew water and poured it out before the Lord and fasted on that day and said there, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the children of Israel in Mizpeh. So in other words, he got up and preached at them. I believe he preached at them, told them what their sins were, called them out as a nation as a whole, called out their national sins. We already know that they had been worshiping false gods. They've now have quit doing that. And of course, he would have let them know that all these things that have happened to them losing the battle, losing the ark, remember when it first came back into the land, it told us in the last chapter that there was the first city it came to in Israel. There was a lot of people in that city that died because they mishandled the ark. Remember, there was men who opened the lid and looked inside to see, make sure everything was still there, and they died. It killed them. The Lord killed them for it. And when the Philistines heard that the children of Israel were gathered together in Mizpeh, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the children of Israel heard it, they were afraid of the Philistines. Here we go again, another battle. And Israel's at a weak point here. Of course, it's been over 20 years now, hasn't it, since we've seen the last battle. Now, whether there were more between then and now, it doesn't tell us, but they're at a weak point. They've just been to the Lord and repented. They've lost that pridefulness that they had before. They've humbled themselves before the Lord now, and so their minds are still on that last battle where they lost so many people, so many men, and they lost even the ark. And the children of Israel said to Samuel, cease not to cry unto the Lord our God for us, that he will save us out of the hand of the Philistines. So they don't ask, they demand. Samuel, keep praying to God for us. And Samuel took a sucking lamb, and offered it for a burnt offering, holy unto the Lord. And Samuel cried unto the Lord for Israel, and the Lord heard him. Notice the Lord, it doesn't say the Lord heard them. When they were crying out, he heard Samuel. He was working through Samuel here. And as Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to battle against Israel. But the Lord thundered with a great thunder on that day upon the Philistines, and discomfited them, and they were smitten before Israel. Israel didn't even have to fight, did they? The Lord appeared, he sent a thunderstorm and destroyed the Philistines. And the men of Israel went out of Mizpeh and pursued the Philistines and smote them until they came under Bethkar. So after they've seen what the Lord has done, they gather up some courage, don't they? And they go out and they chase them down and kill them. The remnant of the ones that are left. Then Samuel took a stone and set it between Mizpah and Shin, and called the name of it Ebenezer, saying, Hitherto hath the Lord helped us. You ever wondered what the name Ebenezer means? Well, there it is. The Lord hath helped us. So the Philistines were subdued, and they came no more into the coast of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. So if you remember when we studied Saul in the early days of David, they were still fighting the Philistines, but the Philistines never overthrew them again. They never conquered Israel again after this point. They run them out of the country, and they never conquered them again. Saul had many battles with them, and so did David, but they never reconquered Israel like they had before. They'd actually, and it tells us here in the next verse, where the Philistines had actually had absorbed into the land of the Philistines cities that actually belonged to Israel. And the cities which the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel, from Ekron even unto Gath, and the coast thereof did Israel deliver out of the hands of the Philistines, and there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. So, remember, Ekron and Gath were two of the cities where the ark had been taken by the Philistines, who had been inflicted by the plague that they were under by the Lord. So now they're back in Israel, in Israel's control. They're taking back all the property that they had lost. And Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life, so until his death. And we see that if you go on through the rest of the book, you see Samuel was a judge over Israel the rest of his life. And he went from year to year in circuit. In other words, he's, like I said before, he was like a circuit rider. In circuit to Bethel and Gilgal and Mizpah, and judged Israel in all those places. And his return was to Ramah, for there was his house. So he lived in Ramah. And we see that in the story of Saul. He would go and journey between these other cities, and then he always came back to Ramah because that's where his home was. And he says, and there he judged Israel. That's where he held court, there in his hometown. And there he built an altar unto the Lord. And so he had built an altar for God, a place to worship there in his hometown, there close to his house, to worship. Now, when you get into chapter 8, and again, we're not going to go that far, we see where Samuel has two sons. So obviously at one point he was married. Was he married? Was he still married? We don't know. The Lord never talks about his wife. All we see is about his two sons and how wicked they were. They were supposed to take over his place as a judge, but they failed at that. So there's a gap between chapter 7 and chapter 8. There's a big gap there in years. We don't know what happened in there. We know all of a sudden he's got sons. When did he have sons? Well, he may have had sons back a couple of chapters back. We don't know. Whenever he got married, that's when he started having kids, I would assume. By the time you get to chapter 8, it appears as though, because he's basically training his sons and trying to get them to take over as judges, that he's an old man by that time. So there's been, and if you think about it, we see details of his youth, from the time from before he was conceived up until the time he was conceived, up till he was a young man. And some would say that when he first comes on the scene there with Eli, that he's possibly late teens, early 20s. And then you have what we just read where there was a 20-year span there that it mentions in chapter 7. So that's 40 years. So he's at least in his 40s at the end of chapter 7. Maybe, and by the time you get to chapter 8, he talks about him being an old man in chapter 8 and 9. You know, a lot of time has gone by. 40 years old, even back then, was not considered an old man. So there's a lot there. It's just like with a lot of the stories, the Lord gives us what he wants us to hear and what he wants us to know about. If you notice, Samuel's story up until now has concentrated solely on his life with the Lord and his ministry with the Lord. You don't see anything about his family. And when you finally do see something about his family in chapter 8, you see his two sons and how wicked they are, and he has to remove them as judges. It's almost as if the Lord wants us to see how faithful Samuel was to him and not be distracted by his family matters. That comes about just briefly in chapter 8. So we're going to stop there with this study. I hope you've learned some things about Samuel that maybe you hadn't seen before. It's nothing new, of course. It's there, been there ever since it was written. But sometimes the Lord doesn't open our eyes to these things, and till we've read over it again, or till someone else reads over it for us. It's been a good study, so we'll see what the Lord has for us next time. I don't know where we'll go next week on Wednesday evening, but we'll see what the Lord has. So that's